welcome back. This is Jim with your third lesson in MQL4 programming. I wanted to highlight some things that I didn't mention in my last video about this external inputs. You notice here on the string variable, when we go back out here to the terminal, and by the way, if you push F4, you can toggle back and forth between the terminal and your meta editor. When we go back to the terminal and we look here at this string that we put in here, one of the ways that you can use this, instead of putting an actual string and a string name and a string, we could put in something along the lines of, let's say, EA settings. And now instead of saying something like equals and then something in here, don't do any of that. If you don't want to, you can just put in assign a data type of string and name it EA settings and save it. Then when you notice, when you go back out to the terminal, you notice how that looks here. The name of it is here, and then it has the EA settings and everything below it. So it's kind of a, you can use it kind of as a label for your settings that come below it. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention to you. And also the second thing I wanted to mention to you was the fact that we have all of these different external double data types down through here labeled for us. You do not have to put these all on separate lines like this if you don't want to. It just makes them easier to spot. And some people think it looks a little neater and cleaner, but you can just separate these with a comma like this. You name the, you take out the semicolons at the ends of these and just put a comma instead. These are all of the type double, so they can all be on the same line. I'll show you here. Take just a second. You can list these like this. Now all of your external floating decimal point settings are on one line. Push F5 and compile. Push F4, go back to the terminal, and you can see if I reset, it still looks just like it did. But like I said, sometimes it's easier to find what you're looking for if they're on separate lines rather than trying to find it in a line. But always remember, at the end of a statement or a sentence like this, there has to be a semicolon. Comma separates different elements, but the semicolon comes at the end like a period at the end of a sentence. Think of a semicolon as a period in MQL4. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, all of these settings up here in this global area of the EA, outside of this function, it's not within these brackets, it's outside, any function in this EA, I'll give you an instance here in our doohickey that we came up with. These three different functions here, if you were to come up here at the top, outside of any function in the white space up here, and you were to put in an external number of some kind, like this, if any of those functions down through here needed to use number in whatever they calculate, they would be able to see this up here. The reason I mention that is because if you'll notice, after we have all these functions up here in this area, when we get into the start function, you see all of these double floating decimal point data types listed through here. Now this merely names, in this instance up here, we have the name of the variable and its value. Here it just simply goes through and states the names of several different values that it is going to be using in this EA. As you can see here, it names 6 different things that it is going to be referring to in this start function. And that's the important point I wanted to stress to you, is that these 6 different doubles and these 3 different integer type pieces of data, these can only be used within this start function. If there was an something declared in here, if you had something in here that had a value inside of this start function here, none of these other functions can look and see this variable in another function. If something is written out here outside, any of these functions can use that particular variable's pieces of information. But within a function, if there is a variable declared in a function and defined in that function, only that function can see it and use it. So what you can actually have in some EAs, they will have a function, let's say, that places buy orders, and in that buy order function it will have a variable called trailing stop, and then there will be another function called sell orders, and it will also have a variable in it called out as a trailing stop. Now normally you cannot have 2 different pieces of data in an EA that have the same name, but since they are in different functions, they don't know each other exist. In a normal MetaTrader installation, you also have a moving average EA, a sample EA that's in your MetaTrader installation. And I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about here. You notice there are some external variables declared here at the top, and one of them is moving period of 12, and one of them is moving shift of 6. Now as we look down through here, I'll try to separate these out for you. Here is one function called calculate current orders, and you can see it's an integer function. It means whatever answer it comes up with when it does its job, it sends back an integer to whatever called the function. Here's one called lots optimized, and it sends back, it's a double, which means it returns a floating decimal point answer. This one's called a void, and a void is a data type or a function type that doesn't return any information back. It just does a job. When you call this function, it does a certain thing in this function, and that's it. It's not a request for information when you call this function. But what I wanted you to notice about that, you notice that is check for open, and this is check for close here. But I want you to notice that they both use moving period, which as we said up there was 12, and moving shift. Instead of putting 12 and 6 in this spot right here, it uses those words that are declared up above and externally by the user of this EA. Down here again, you can see it is used again. Both of these functions are able to see that setting up at the top. Up here, they're both able to see this from within their functions. But another thing I wanted you to notice is that within each of these functions, they declare a double called MA, and this one here also declares a double called MA. Now you cannot have them both in the same function. You can't have 2 declared variables of the same name. But since they are in a different function, they don't know each other exist. When this function runs, it does its little job, and then it goes back to the start function and waits on the next tick. So anyway, I hope I have successfully explained to you and helped you to grasp the concept of how these declared variables up here at the top can be seen from any function, but only the variables declared inside of a function can only be used and seen by that function. So when you're getting ready to make an indicator or an expert advisor, you may wonder, well, what settings do I need to put up here at the top, and what settings do I need to put in my functions? Well, think about it this way. All of these settings up here at the top are pretty well permanent. Your user setting of 60 for a take profit and your trailing stop of 30 is not going to change as the EA runs. The arrow color is going to stay the same. Is hedging allowed is always going to stay true. And the number of lots that you like to place, the lot size of the order you like to place is going to stay the same. However, these values down here in the start function, the current MACD and the previous MACD, all of these things will change as time goes on. Every time that a tick comes in and the price has changed, the MACD will have changed and will have a different value at that moment in time. Every time the start function runs, it has amnesia, so to speak. You tell it once again, there's a thing called the MACD current and a thing called the MACD previous and a thing called the signal current, and it doesn't say, I know that, you already told me that. No, every time the start function runs, it starts over again with a clean mind, and you tell it again that these variables exist, and then down here it assigns a value to that variable. Whatever the MACD is at this current time is assigned to MACD current at this moment. And then if it meets the rules of taking a trade, down here, if the MACD current is greater than 0 and so on, it may or may not take a trade. But as time progresses, and every time a tick comes in, the MACD current is changed and changed and changed until the conditions are met to take a trade. So these variables that are declared in this function are constantly changing. These variables up here are not normally changing. The only way that you can change one of these variables as the EA runs is if, let's say up here at the top, you wanted to keep track of how many trades were open. Open trades. And we start off with 0 if you want to. You can either say that or you can just leave nothing there. But when the EA starts, it is told that there is a variable, an integer that exists that is called open trades, and any function knows that exists. So let's say as time goes on, down here in your start function, you have it do a little calculation every tick to check to see how many trades are open, and it sends that answer from the start function back up here. Let's say after a period of time there are 3 trades open or 2 trades open. That thing will hold that number in its mind, so to speak. Okay, there's 2 trades open. Now why you are telling that, more or less posting it out here on this bulletin board area for all of the other functions to see, is let's say you have another function or two in your EA that likes to know how many trades are open and gets a little worried. You have it set so that when you get so many trades open, you start trading a little bit smaller lot size. So let's say you have some functions that enter trades, buy trades or sell trades, and those functions, before they place a trade, they want to know how many open trades there are. Well, the start function, every time it runs, it updates this number. And so when the other functions run and they need to know how many trades are open, they already have that available to them up here. So that just gives you an overall idea of how the functions can communicate a piece of data from one function to the other by putting it up here in this area and changing it as time goes by, much like posting something on a bulletin board up here that all of the other functions can see. It's kind of a hard concept to grasp, but eventually you'll see why this is important to realize how this works. Okay, well, I'll let you go rest your head now and think about this for a little bit, but I hope you understand this concept. I wanted to try to make sure that in this course I didn't just teach you words and numbers and facts and figures, but also understand how things relate to one another so that you'll know how to put together anything that you want to put together, even if I haven't particularly showed you that thing. As long as you get the concept of what does work and what won't work, then it'll make it a lot easier for you to code your own thing. In the next one, we'll code a little bitty EA, a kind of a hello world type thing, just so we can get a sense of accomplishment. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.